welcome to On This Day in Tudor History with me, Claire Ridgway. Now, today I'm taking you back to, well, the very start of Queen Mary I's reign. For on this day in Tudor history, the 21st of July, 1553, just days after he'd left London with an army to apprehend Mary, who was the half-sister of the late King Edward VI, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, was arrested near Cambridge. But how and why did the man who had ruled England on Edward VI's behalf as Lord President of his Privy Council come to this? Well, let me explain. Of course, summer 1553 was the summer of three monarchs, a very, very complicated situation. In May 1553, Northumberland's son, Lord Guildford Dudley, had married Lady Jane Grey, eldest daughter of Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, and his wife Frances Brandon, Frances being King Edward VI's cousin. When King Edward VI was seriously ill in 1553, he wrote his devise for the succession, his wishes for the succession in the event of his death. Now, Edward loved his half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, but he didn't view them as legitimate claimants, as Acts of Parliament had deemed them illegitimate. He looked instead to the Greys, choosing for the crown to descend through the male heirs of Francis. However, Francis didn't have any sons, so when it became clear that Edward was actually dying, he added the words Lady Jane Grey and her heirs male to his devise. Edward died on the 6th of July 1553, and his Privy Council, led by Northumberland, set about making Jane queen. On the 9th of July, Northumberland informed his daughter-in-law of the king's death and his wishes, and Jane accepted the crown as her duty. It was Northumberland who greeted the new queen and her husband, his son, at the Tower of London on the 10th of July and made sure that she was proclaimed queen there and around the city of London. Unfortunately, nobody at this point had apprehended Mary, who was busy rallying supporters to her cause and preparing to fight for the throne. The Privy Council chose Jane's father, the Duke of Suffolk, to go to East Anglia with a force to fetch Mary. But a distraught Jane implored them to send Northumberland instead. Northumberland had reached Cambridge by the 15th of July and was on his way to Bury St Edmunds to confront Mary's men when he heard reports of the size of her army, which well outnumbered his own force. He decided, therefore, to retreat back to Cambridge. What he didn't know was that Queen Jane's council, without his strong leadership, had swapped sides and had decided to proclaim for Mary instead. On the 19th of July 1553, Mary was officially proclaimed Queen Mary in London. Northumberland reached Cambridge on the 20th of July 1553 and there heard news of the Privy Council's betrayal and that Mary had been proclaimed Queen in Jane's place. Martyrologist John Fox shares the eyewitness account of Dr. Edwin Sandys, Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge University, regarding what Northumberland did on hearing this bad news. He writes, "The Duke that night retired to Cambridge and sent for Dr. Sandys to go with him to the marketplace to proclaim Queen Mary. The Duke cast up his cap with others and so laughed that the tears ran down his cheeks for grief. He told Dr. Sandys that Queen Mary was a merciful woman and that he doubted not thereof, declaring that he had sent unto her to know her pleasure and looked for a general pardon. Dr. Sandys answered, My life is not dear unto me, neither have I done or said anything that urgeth my conscience. For that which I spake of the state hath instructions warranted by the subscription of 16 counsellors. Neither can speech be treason, neither yet have I spoken further than the word of God, and the laws of realm do warrant me, come of me what God will. But be you assured, you shall never escape death. For if she would save you, Those that now shall rule will kill you." Sandys goes on to say that the guard came that very same night and apprehended Northumberland. The next morning, the Earl of Arundel visited Northumberland, who fell on his knees, and he reminded the Earl that he had done nothing but by the consents of you and all the whole council. The Earl replied to Northumberland that he'd been sent by the Queen to arrest him, and arrest him he did. The next morning, the Earl of Arundel visited Northumberland, of course, the Earl being one of those who'd betrayed Northumberland. Northumberland fell on his knees and reminded the Earl that he'd done nothing but by the consents of you and all the whole council. The Earl replied that he'd been sent by the Queen to arrest Northumberland, and arrest him he did. On the 25th of July 1553, Northumberland, with his sons John, Ambrose and Henry, his brother Sir Andrew Dudley, the Earl of Huntingdon, Lord Hastings and several others, were taken to the Tower of London, being greeted in London by a hostile crowd that threw stones at Northumberland and called him traitor and heretic. The next day, more prisoners were brought to the Tower, including the Marquis of Northampton and Robert Dudley, another of the Duke's sons. Of course, his other son, Guildford, who was the consort of the former Queen Jane, was already a prisoner there. On the 18th of August 1553, Northumberland was found guilty of treason for his part in putting Lady Jane Grey on the throne. His execution was scheduled for the 21st of August. However, his execution was cancelled, albeit temporarily, and instead the Duke was taken to Mass at the Chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula at the Tower of London, where he recanted his Protestant faith. This was probably more an appeal for mercy and a way of trying to save his sons than a true recantation. It didn't save the Duke, for he was beheaded on Tower Hill the following day, the 22nd of August 1553, and he was laid to rest next to his predecessor, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, who'd been Lord Protector in Edward VI's reign. His son Guildford was executed in February 1554, on the same day that Lady Jane Grey, the former Queen Jane, was executed. But John, Ambrose, Henry and Robert Dudley all survived the events of 1553, as did the Marquis of Northampton and the Earl of Huntingdon, and they were later released. Also on this day in Tudor history, the 21st of July 1545, in the reign of King Henry VIII, French forces landed on the Isle of Wight in an attempt to invade the English island. Find out what happened in last year's video, which I'll give you a link to. Thank you for joining me. You can subscribe by clicking round about there. You can hit the bell to be notified as these videos go live, and you can give me a like and leave me a comment. I will see you very soon. Take care, keep safe. Bye bye.